And in certain circumstances, when our social battery or our emotional and our mental battery is low, it may not be the best time because when we say when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed, that's the time when our capacity to emotionally regulate is very thin. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Dr. Maisha, and as usual, I am grateful to be here with you for yet another episode. What's been brewing in my mind the last couple of weeks is how sometimes when we are experiencing discomfort, we can mistake that for danger. And I think this is an important conversation to have, the distinction between discomfort and danger, or discerning discomfort from danger. Because when we're in danger, we have a particular response. Our brain, our amygdala, that processes threat, sends us down a pathway. And that particular pathway, whatever one of the five survival response pathways we go down, which I'll talk about in a moment, can lead us to communication and behaviors that can have lasting impact on ourselves and the people around us. So I think it's important to begin to look at not only how we discern discomfort or the difference between discomfort and danger, but how we begin to discern it, how we distinguish it for ourselves. So let's talk about it. Let's start by just talking a little bit about danger. And what is danger? That is a true threat that is happening. And there can be physical danger, there could be emotional, and then there is the experience of mental, emotional, social threat. When we talk about threat, what exactly does that mean? It could be the threat of feeling or being thrown out of the social group. It could be the threat of being ostracized by the group or being humiliated by the group. So there are lots of potential types of the experience of social threat. Emotional threat can feel and look like a lack of safety, being gaslit, being abandoned, being invalidated, and also being overtly abused. The emotional abuse, manipulation, controlled. Mental or psychological threat is a very close cousin to emotional threat, but there is a difference, right? So that psychological threat can be feeling manipulated and gaslit. Again, some crossover. The psychological abuse, being made to feel crazy. I'll use that word with quotes because I'm very cautious about how that's used. But like when we say to ourselves, man, I'm not crazy, in that way. It's important to recognize like these threats feel very real to the brain. And yet there are areas where we're not at threat, where it's discomfort. For example, when someone sets a boundary with us, it may feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort can sometimes register as threat because maybe, for example, when we set a boundary, we have a background fear based on a past experience that if we set that boundary, that person is going to overreact or maybe abandon us altogether. So it could feel like an impending, we're setting up a story that setting a boundary, for example, could lead to these things. Then boundary occurs as when we're on the receiving end. But also, let's talk about the being on the source end or the setting end of a boundary. So when we're on the receiving end of a boundary, there could be a fear, oh, they're going to abandon us. They're taking something away from me, right? I'm in a lose situation. It's very binary thinking that can lead to that feeling of threat. When we're on the side of setting a boundary, it could be the fear of the reaction, the fear of how they're going to respond. Are they going to overreact or are they going to run away? So, very similar interactions, but from different sides of the table, so to speak. And so, while being on the receiving end of a boundary or setting a boundary is not an actual threat, it can occur as a threat when are when we have a certain filter or a story set up around that thing. Similarly, conflict can bring up the sensation of danger. It can bring that up in our brains, right? And again, that really depends on how have we been socialized to conflict? What has conflict looked like in our lives, in our childhoods? And so while conflict really can be uncomfortable, it's not always a threat. Disagreement is not a threat. And so I think it's useful for us to be able to begin to pause and recognize what's going on in our bodies, right? So we bring in the remap framework as we are talking about distinguishing discomfort and danger. We can begin to bring in this aspect of recognizing what's going on in our bodies, even recognizing the story we might be telling ourselves, and reflecting on what's actually happening, right? What's happening that may be the source of what we're experiencing or what we're feeling. So, for example, if I am wanting to have a difficult conversation with a friend of mine about something that maybe they did that upset me, then I can pause and recognize, okay, this is the anxiety that's going on with my body. What is the source of that? Oh, maybe growing up, what I saw around different difficult conversation was that I wasn't heard, and often things were turned around and made to be my fault. And so the story that I'm telling myself might be, oh, if I bring this up, then I'm going to get invalidated and I'm going to get gaslit and I'm not going to be heard. So then the discomfort of me even bringing this up with a friend. And I'll tell you, I recently had lunch with a good friend of mine, and coming up on this lunch that the couple of days before, I felt this immense anxiety because we had some difficult conversations in the past, and there was what felt like distance happening between us. And so I was really afraid. Was this going to be the completion of the end of our friendship? And when I paused and I reflected on that, I realized that where that was coming from was a previous relationship that had been a very long and close relationship, and even a little bit of a mentorship with a young lady who we completed that relationship. And but it came as a surprise, the movement toward completion. It wasn't something that was like a natural finish. It was something that I felt blindsided by. And so that past experience began to bleed into the story of what I was telling myself about what was going to happen in the conversation. So here I'm thinking social threat, right? Oh, I'm gonna lose this. I'm gonna lose this friendship. And it ended up being nothing like that. And when I got in the car, I really had to be with myself and be like, no matter, this is why practice progress over perfection, right? No matter how much work we do, the brain still does what the brain does. And it's always important to have that. We talk about recognize and reflect, but also the emotional awareness and honesty. And I had to get really honest with myself. Okay, I was feeling this anxiety. And I was honest with myself before that I was feeling the anxiety. I was feeling a little apprehension about the meeting or the lunch. But then when I got in the car, I had to get really honest about what that was. and be courageous enough to name, like, that was a story I made up based on a past experience. I was never in danger of losing that friendship. And so, how do we begin? How do we distinguish discomfort and danger? First of all, we have to recognize what's going on in our body. And of course, let's be clear, we do need to be mindful of whether, if there's real physical danger, we need to remove ourselves. We're not going to go through and necessarily have this, we're not going to sit there if we feel in physical danger and be like, oh, let me reflect and recognize what's going on. No, when the system is built for a reason, that system of detecting danger is built to actually protect us. And so the amygdala works within, I think it's point oh fourth of a second. That's very fast. If you feel like you're in physical danger, remove yourself. Your instincts know, right? So I want to name that up front because what I want to make sure that I'm mindful of, there is a purpose for all of this. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about emotions as data in a future episode. But there's a purpose to our system. However, we do want to begin to recognize when we're in interactions and we start to feel a bubbling up of anxiety or of anger or of fear, and we're in social situations, or we're coming up on a difficult conversation, or we're noticing conflict with a person who we know not to be violent, right? We know to be a safe person to communicate with. But what's arising in us is a past experience that taps on that survival response. And so that is when we can slow down and take the pause and look what is going on in the environment, what behaviors are happening that are causing our bodies to feel what they're feeling, this rise in angst and apprehension and anxiety or even anger. And say, okay, let's take a step back. On the 3 positions of listening, there is moving into that third position, that observer position, to say, what is it that is at the source of me feeling this way? Is there social danger actually? Is there psychological threat happening? Because perhaps we're in a meeting or you're in an interaction and there is some psychological manipulation happening, or there is something that can land as threat. That could feel real and that could be actual. And so if that is happening, then we can take measures to remove ourselves and take care of ourselves. But if we're in a circumstance where we're just having a disagreement, then we can pause and reflect. Okay, this disagreement, what is it? Is it looking like something in the past? Maybe I'm not at physical risk. I'm not at emotional or psychological risk here. And allow ourselves to take that pause. Now, I think when we take the pause, if we're able to do it in the moment, it's useful to acknowledge what's happening with the person that you're speaking with. If you feel safe enough or you trust them enough, you trust in their reaction enough, right? Wow, let me just take a moment because this is feeling like something that I've experienced before and I'm having some anxiety or I'm feeling some kind of way about it, right? So that's the acknowledgement of it. And what that does is it puts space between you and the person and the interaction to be able to look at that, or for you to be able to say, I need a moment. I need a moment to step away. And then let's come back. Let me go take care of myself and let's come back. Or for you to recognize the discomfort, name it and say, okay, I'm feeling a little discomfort in this conversation. It makes me nervous, but I'm going to push forward anyway. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to be courageous because we need to do this in order to whatever's at stake, whatever the commitment is. Like, I'm committed to resolving this disagreement in a grown person way, in an adult and an emotionally intelligent way. So it's uncomfortable. I feel it in my body, but let's move forward. or you could have that conversation with yourself in the moment. But I think what most must first happen is to recognize in that moment that even though there's an uncomfortable conversation happening, you may not actually be in danger, to be able to separate those two. Once you're not in any physical immediate danger, to be able to look at, okay, this is uncomfortable, but is it a threat? Is it an emotional threat? Is it a psychological threat? Is it a social threat? And can I continue to put one foot in front of the other in this interaction to achieve what I'm wanting to achieve as an outcome or a goal of this connection? And I think that is what needs to happen to put space in between you and your immediate reactions. Now, also, let's just be clear. This takes practice. It takes a lot of modeling, it takes a lot of mirroring, but most of all, it takes practice. And sometimes you won't achieve this, and you won't always achieve this level of stepping back. Sometimes you have to debrief it and come back and have another conversation. That's normal. When I talk about in my upcoming TEDx talk, repair, I'll talk a little bit about how this can look messy, right? That's why I practice progress over perfection. And so, as much as we can push ourselves to move through discomforts in those challenging interactions, we can also give ourselves grace when we don't get it perfectly, because it is practice progress over perfection. Right? And we can always do over, we can always come back and mend, like repair when the reaction's gone wrong, right? When the reaction is not what you would have liked it to be. And so I want to encourage and empower you to begin to notice in your body these responses. And then, as long as you're not in any immediate physical danger or there's not an imminent threat of some sort, to begin to like pause and reflect. Okay, this is discomfort, but am I in really an immediate danger right now? And if the answer is no, and this is from an interaction standpoint, if the answer is no, then begin to name what it is that you're experiencing. Acknowledge it maybe in the space to get it out of your brain, or acknowledge it for yourself and make a choice of whether you're able to go ahead and move through that discomfort. And in certain circumstances, when our social battery or our emotional and our mental battery is low, it may not be the best time, because when we say when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed, that's the time when our capacity to emotionally regulate is very thin. And so if you're one of those and you notice this is discomfort, but I don't know that I have the capacity to move forward, then you can name that and then go take care of yourself, feed yourself, rest, and then come back to the conversation and move through the discomfort in that way. If there's a boundary to set, you can set the boundary, step away, come back, and have a further conversation about why you need that boundary set. And you really don't owe people an explanation around setting boundaries, but that may be something you want to do. All right. So notice what's going on in your body as you start to move into these places of discomfort. Recognize where you're collapsing discomfort with danger and threat, and begin to look at how you can begin to unravel the stories that you're telling yourself and the actual event that is happening. Okay. And I invite you to share this episode with a friend, with a family member, with a colleague, and even maybe save it and come back to it later, because sometimes we listen to things the first time around and they do hit, but then we need to percolate on them and reflect on them and then come back and listen and look at how you can implement these tools for the conversations, the difficult conversations you may be having. All right. So share the episode. We invite you to leave a comment and let us know how it's going. You're welcome to, if you are subscribed to my email list, which you can do by just going to the website, there's a page for that. But I'll also post the link in the show notes for if you want to become a part of the email list. Share this episode with a friend, a family, a colleague, and let me know how it's going as you're distinguishing these things. And we very much appreciate if you leave us a review on the platform that you're listening, because again, it helps the platform to serve up to more people who this conversation would be valuable. All right. Go forth and practice feeling your feelings, feeling the feelings in your body and distinguishing discomfort from danger. And because conscious communication is the access to connection. Until the next time, have a great week and stay empowered.